Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Soul-u-tions podcast. My name is Simkins, and I am your host for the next 20 minutes or so. Today, I want to talk to you about something that's come up in my grief research. I'm doing a paper for the Georgia Bar Journal, which is the publication for Georgia lawyers who are members of the State Bar of Georgia. And I really have uncovered some very, very interesting research about the difference between stress and grief and how we are all approaching grief in a way that is appropriate for stress, but doesn't work for grief. So I want you to meet me on the other side of this intro because I'm betting that you're grieving about either a big loss in your life or maybe a little small loss in your life that you don't even think is recognized by anybody else or included or rises to the level of full-fledged grief. But it does. I'm going to tell you about that, and then I'm going to tell you what you can do about it.
Einstein said, "We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them." Most everyone in the world is solving their problems the wrong way. Our problems come from our thinking, and we can solve them with our thinking. So, whether you're at your lowest, just trying to grow, or whether you are trying to sustain growth over your lifetime, join us as we push the boundaries of our current thinking and redefine how we find solutions.
The hope and the strength and the love and the smiles and the laughter of friends and family. Add it up, you'll find no limit to the possibilities.
So, if you haven't listened to my podcast on grief from a couple of weeks ago, go back after you listen to this podcast and listen to that one because they're a nice complement to one another. So anyway, this has a little fun aside on AI. I did that podcast, and that was, it's just been very, very, very well received. And it's on this concept of prolonged grief. And generally, we think of grief as, oh my goodness, someone passed away in your life and you're grieving. And in January, my father passed away. And so my whole family, my mom, my siblings, like my kids, my husband, my sister-in-laws and brother-in-law, their nieces and nephews, everyone's grieving, an extended family. But it triggered for me 15 years of grief. And so I was like, I think I'm going to do my next article for Georgia lawyers on this idea of grief, because we talk a lot about stress and how stress impacts us in such challenging ways in our lives. And we don't really talk that much about grief. And maybe we're scared to, maybe we tiptoe around it. Maybe we don't want to step into this area of grief. But I would say that it's a deep and meaningful area to investigate within you. And I promise you that if you are a human alive today, you have something within you that is longing to be grieved. And I think the reason I feel so confident in making that statement is that most everyone who's alive today, except for those little people under the age of 4 who I don't think are listening to the Soul-u-tions podcast, every person who's alive today lived through the pandemic. And if you lived through the pandemic, you have something that you lost during that time. I mean, some people lost loved ones who passed away from COVID. Other people lost friendships over maybe political differences and how you viewed COVID and how you didn't, right? It really impacted friendships. Some people lost their jobs during that time. People also lost their sense of social well-being. We lost this, the conversations at the water cooler or in the coffee room, break room, right? You lost your freedom to be able to go out to dinner or go shopping. There was such uncertainty during that time, and the way that we had been living prior to that time, we haven't quite returned to that yet. And all of that falls under the definition of loss. So loss doesn't just include the big things that we think of when we think of a death or a divorce or a loss of job. Loss also includes, I believe it was, if I'm recalling this correctly, a woman by the name of Pauline Boss, who coined the term ambiguous loss. And ambiguous loss includes the little things that we lose. And this could be something like, oh, you thought that you were going to go on a vacation during that time and you couldn't go on the vacation. Or maybe it was your child's graduation, or if you were graduating from high school or college, you lost that graduation ceremony, that sense of closure that you had during that time. So loss can be as big or as small as we think it can be. And often people in the Soul-u-tions labs, I talk about this a lot, this idea that you can lose a dream that you had for what your future was going to look like. And there was a great, I don't know if you have ever read the book. If you haven't, you have got to put it on your reading list. Tiny Beautiful Things by Cheryl Strayed. Cheryl Strayed also wrote the book Wild that Reese Witherspoon, her production company, turned into a movie and that she starred in. But Cheryl took over this advice column called Dear Sugar. And people would write into this advice column, and she has the most compassionate responses and just really gritty and great advice that she gives people in replies. And Tiny Beautiful Things is a compilation of some of the best of those essays. But you could just type into the Googles, Cheryl Strayed, and that's CHERYL STRAYED, Cheryl Strayed, Dear Sugar, and Ghost Ship. And this particular piece of advice will come up. And I think it was in the context of someone who always thought that they wanted to have children. And then it came to the point in time to have children, and they weren't sure about it anymore. And they were writing into Dear Sugar, AKA Cheryl Strayed, to see what, it's like, will I regret this if I don't do it? And her response was that we all have sisterships in our lives. They're the lives that we actually live. And then there are the lives that we thought we were going to live, but don't unfold like we thought they were going to unfold. And that is what she calls a ghost ship or a sistership. But the term ghost is really appropriate because those dreams, the life that we dreamed of that didn't unfold the way we dreamt, tends to haunt us, right? You can just feel like, I thought it was going to be a different way. I didn't think it was going to end up this way. And that's a pretty easy thing to happen, especially when we live in a culture of highly influenced by happily ever after, right? The movie happens, and whether it's a Disney movie or a rom-com or a sports whatever, right? It's like, oh, they're going to go through this struggle and they resolve that struggle, and then they live happily ever after, as if there's never going to be another struggle in life. And let me tell you what, when we were going through childhood cancer, I really did think like, oh, we've just got to get through this and then we'll get back to living the life that we had planned for ourselves. And so that didn't happen at all. In fact, we got through it, and then we had so many other challenges. It was more like the feeling of being a surfer in a tsunami. And every time you didn't drown in one wave that crashed on top of you and you came up for just a little gasp of air, that another wave would absolutely crash and you'd be paddling to find your board and come up for air. And this just happened time and time again. And you're like, how much more can one person bear? And I just remember that I felt like that just was so unfair that we had gone through this hard time. And then, that was okay to go through one or even two hard times, but to go through three, I mean, where is the happily ever after? And then when you get through it and the dust settles, you have these moments of the ghost ship, of what you thought your life would be or how you thought it would unfold. And it comes up in these tiny, tiny little ways. My son, Brennan, who had pediatric cancer, and you're going to, by the time you hear this, his episode is going to be out. He recorded a podcast with me. And if you haven't heard that one, you need to add that to your next listen list after the one on prolonged grief, because it's an amazing podcast with Brennan. But because of all of his treatment and our journey and how his life has unfolded, he never went to school full-time after the first semester of his first grade year. And in fact, he missed school from January of his first grade year. He didn't even come back until maybe April of his fifth grade year. Like that, those many years were totally gone. And then it was like maybe he could go for 3 half days a week up until he was in high school and blah, blah, blah. So he is now 22 and getting ready to start what will be his third year in the College of Charleston's REACH program. But all his buddies that he started the first grade with, they all just graduated from college within the last month. And listen, I am totally in alignment with what Brennan having a journey that is all of his and all of that. I'm at 100% of love and acceptance with that. But when May came along and all his friends were graduating, I felt that little bit of haunting of that ghost ship of what I thought his life was going to be, what his life could have been without childhood cancer. And so there are moments like that, right? There are moments where you may be going about your day and you never even think about these other dreams that you had. and then something will happen, and you'll feel the loss of what that life was. On Father's Day, I felt that with my dad, my first Father's Day without my dad. I have a great girlfriend that just married for the first time at 57, and her mother walked down the aisle, and then her father walked her down the aisle. And I'm like, gosh, you feel both the presence and the absence of the life that you have and the life that you thought that you'd have. And I never really contemplated, really thinking about a parent not being in this world with you can be a bit of a ghost ship. So as I'm, writing this article and thinking about grief and how to help people handle their grief in a way, I came across this additional research, in addition to the ambiguous loss, this research on the difference between stress and grief. And so for stress, we're all taught how to manage our stress, which means that we have some sense of control in the input levels of how much stress we take on, right? Like, okay, understand, like you might be getting to the boiling point of how much stress you can handle, and you know this by certain indicators in your life. You may be feeling overwhelmed. You might be afraid to open up your email. Your kids are telling you one more thing that they need, and you're hearing wah, wah, wah in your head, and you're just not absorbing anything or taking it in. All of those, you might be pouring a third glass of rosé at the end of the night. Like all of these things are indicators like, maybe I need to kind of manage some stress here. And so we're so accustomed to being told how to manage stress that we think then grief is a place where that we can manage as well. But grief is not an emotion that can be managed. Grief is a feeling that we can feel and an invitation to let go and to let some things fall apart in your life. And that is a totally different skill set than learning how to manage stress. So, how do we let go when we live in a world that's all about being on the go and not about letting go? And there are a few things I want to share with you that I think are ways that you can let go. One is go on what I would call a pilgrimage or a mini pilgrimage. Now, what is pilgrimage? A pilgrimage is just a walk. It's just a walk. And it's a walk from one place to another. But there's an ancient art of pilgrimage, which is, it has this sacred component to it, right? Where you're going from one place to another. Like back in the day, there's this beautiful pilgrimage that people still take called the Camino Trail that ends in Santiago in Spain. And so there's this place where the remains of St. James are supposed to be in this certain cathedral. So people would walk and walk and walk and walk. I think it takes you about 3 months if you do it all at once to walk the Camino. But while you're walking with this idea that you're bringing something with you that you want to let go of in the walking. And not very many people have time for taking a 3-month walk, but you can take a mini pilgrimage, which just would be out your door. I live in North Augusta, South Carolina. We have this beautiful greenway. I can just hop on the park and go to the greenway. But what I can do is carry with me this idea of I'm going to carry this recognition that I've lost something in my life, right? If I take Brennan's graduation with all of his friends, that I'm going to take like the part of me that is feeling that sense of loss with me. I'm going to say, okay, gosh, that is hard. You really thought that your life, that his life would unfold in a different way than it has. And he's going to graduate 2 years down the road, and he's going to have a certificate, not a diploma, but he's going to have, this thing. It's just going to be different. You might have thought he was going to go to law school or medical school, or he's going to do this. That's not what he's going to do. He's going to do something that's all his own. If you've listened to the podcast, you know what he's doing right now, which is something that's very, very, very cool, and that I never saw in his future, which is the other side of this, like, ghost ship, right? Like, there's the sister ship of the thing that we never even dreamed of that ends up being better. It's so both and, this thing called life. But you take yourself on a walk with the idea of letting it go. And while you're out in nature, I love to do this particular walk in the fall because I can see how the trees are letting the leaves go. And I remind myself that while I live in a go-go world and not much opportunity to practice letting go, that because I'm part of the natural world, that perhaps letting go is inherent. There's an inherent intelligence within me that knows how to let go, even when I have not been socialized and well practiced in letting go. And so I'll remind myself, like, oh, yeah, the trees let go of their leaves, those trees that do, every year. And the new leaves pop up, and then they let those go. Or maybe you're just going to put your hand on your chest. Maybe you're at work and you don't have time to even go on a mini micro pilgrimage, and you just have a moment at your desk between Zoom calls or an appointment, and you put your hand over your heart and you close your eyes and you take an inhale. And you take an exhale. And an exhale is just a letting go that you know how to do, right? And so maybe I would breathe in like the knowledge that I had this other dream for this particular time in my life, and that that's not going to happen. And I let it go. And even while I was saying that to you, the example that just came to my mind, like you might have a kid that applied to college and didn't get into their dream college and got into another college. And you've got this time over the summer before they start. That's a loss. That could be a ghost ship, right? You taking time to inhale, acknowledge, recognize that there was this other dream that we had for them, and just let that dream go, just as a ghost ship would just continue to ride across the ocean. And it may take several rounds. That's okay. It's not a magic spell. It's an organic process of letting go, right? The trees don't just drop all their leaves at once. You don't just do one exhale and never have to exhale again in your life. No, it's part of a process. So with grief, the letting go, the recognition, the allowing yourself to feel the loss that you've experienced, feel the love that you've experienced, feel whatever it is that's missing, and letting it go. And even if you just incorporate that into your day, a couple of breaths a day, that will help. All right, my friends, don't forget to sign up for my free masterclass on TaraSimkins.com if you haven't done it already. Because that's how I get you on my email list, and that's how we start communicating in a more regular basis, and how you can reach out to me and let me know what you want me to talk about on this podcast. And that's where you're going to be the first to know about when the Soul-u-tions Lab opens up again this fall. And just think about how amazing it will be to get a jump start on the new year when it's back to school time in the fall. Thank you again. I so appreciate it. And if you being here and listening and showing up week after week, and also forward this to a friend that you think has experienced a loss, whether it's a big loss or a small loss. Could be that friend whose kid didn't get into the school that they wanted to. It could be someone who just celebrated, the 4th of July without a loved one. Just whatever it is, send it to someone and let them know you're thinking of them. Until next time, XOXO and press on.
'Cause I ain't done living the life I'm meant to lead. And I ain't done loving the ones who cared for me. The hope and the strength and the love and the smiles and the laughter of friends and family. Add it up, you'll find no limit to the possibility.